In the quiet of a dimly lit room, where the golden light of a September afternoon filtered through worn curtains, Edgar Cayce lay still upon his simple bed, eyes closed, hands folded across his chest, which rose and fell in a rhythmic cadence. It was the autumn of 1944, and the man who had dedicated his entire life to unraveling the mysteries of the human soul was approaching the greatest mystery of all, his own transition to the beyond. At 67, the sleeping prophet of Virginia Beach carried in his frail body the weight of 43 years of psychic readings, of visions that transcended the boundaries of time and space, of revelations that had touched thousands of lives. Around the world, in those final months of earthly existence, something extraordinary began to happen. The visions that had previously only come during his deep trance states began to erupt in moments of wakefulness, like gentle waves of knowledge washing over his conscious awareness. It was as if the veils between worlds were becoming increasingly thin, allowing glimpses of the hereafter to seep into his everyday perception. His wife Gertrude, a faithful companion throughout a lifetime of spiritual discoveries, perceived the subtle changes in his countenance. There was a different gleam in his eyes, a serenity that seemed to emanate from deep within his soul, as if he were gradually connecting with dimensions that remained invisible to others. During these last weeks, Cayce began to speak of experiences he had never shared publicly, revelations he had kept secret for decades, fearful that the world was not ready to understand the true nature of the soul's journey after physical death. In intimate conversations with Gertrude and his son Hugh Lynn, he began to describe in surprising detail the process by which souls disincarnate, traverse the intermediate planes, and find their new spiritual families in the afterlife. These were accounts that transcended anything he had revealed in his public readings, meticulous descriptions of an organized and structured spiritual world where each soul finds exactly what it needs to continue its eternal evolution. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came through a particularly vivid dream Cayce had in September of that year. In the dream, he found himself in a vast garden of light, where the colors possessed an intensity and quality that did not exist on Earth. The flowers were not simply beautiful, they pulsed with conscious life, radiating frequencies of love that penetrated directly into his soul. At the center of this garden, there was a crystal fountain that emanated musical sounds, each drop of water producing a perfect note that harmonized with an invisible celestial choir. Beside the fountain, luminous figures awaited him, beings he instantly recognized as souls who had departed long ago, but who maintained bonds of love with him that transcended all dimensional barriers. Among these figures, the radiant presence of his mother, Cayce, stood out. She had passed years before, but now appeared young and vibrant, enveloped in a golden aura that pulsed with the same frequency as his own heart. She approached him with a smile that contained all the tenderness of the universe, and without uttering words, transmitted directly to his consciousness a series of revelations about the nature of life after death that left him profoundly transformed. Through this telepathic communication, she showed him how souls, upon leaving their physical bodies, do not simply float in a spiritual void, but are immediately welcomed by groups of kindred souls who form true spiritual families in the afterlife. These spiritual families, his mother explained through direct impressions on his mind, are not determined by earthly biological ties, but by deep vibrational affinities, shared purposes, and similar levels of conscious evolution. A departing soul may discover that its true spiritual family is composed of beings it never knew physically on Earth, but with whom it maintains connections that go back to unimaginable ages. Similarly, biological relatives who seemed close in earthly life may belong to completely different spiritual groups, following distinct evolutionary paths on the higher planes. Upon awakening from this revelatory dream, Cayce remained motionless for a long time, processing the profound implications of what he had experienced. For the first time in his life, he had received a clear and detailed vision of the transition process that awaited all human souls. It was not death in the traditional sense of the word, but a transformation, a rebirth in dimensions where consciousness expands and finds its true cosmic family. Over the following days, these revelations continued to unfold in his mind, like petals of a spiritual flower slowly opening, revealing ever deeper layers of meaning. On a particularly serene October afternoon, while resting in his favorite armchair in front of the window overlooking the garden, Cayce had another extraordinary experience. His eyes closed naturally, but this time he did not enter his usual trance state. Instead, his consciousness gradually expanded, as if it were being gently lifted out of his physical body. He could see himself sitting in the armchair, but simultaneously perceived himself floating in a space of golden light where time seemed not to exist. In this expanded state of consciousness, Cayce witnessed something that would forever change his understanding of the nature of death and spiritual rebirth. He saw a soul that had just left its earthly body, an elderly woman who had passed away in a nearby hospital. The soul of this woman, whom he perceived to be named Margaret, was being gently guided by two luminous beings through successive layers of light, each representing different levels of purification and spiritual understanding. The first level Margaret traversed was what Cayce perceived as the review plane, where the soul has the opportunity to observe its recently concluded life with total clarity and understanding. There was no judgment in a punitive sense, but rather a loving and compassionate analysis of each experience, each choice, each moment of growth or stagnation. Margaret could see how her actions had affected others, how her words had planted seeds of love or pain, how her deepest intentions had shaped the tapestry of her earthly existence. During this review process, something extraordinary happened. As Margaret truly understood the impact of her life, other souls who had been touched by her presence on earth began to appear around her. Some were people she had known and loved, but others were souls who had been influenced by her in ways she had never perceived during her physical life. A boy she had helped on the street 40 years prior, a co-worker who had been inspired by her kindness, a stranger who had received her smile at a moment of deep sadness. All these souls presented themselves to acknowledge the role she had played in their own spiritual journeys. Cayce watched with growing fascination as these souls began to form concentric circles around Margaret, not hierarchically, but in patterns that reflected different types of spiritual connection. Some souls radiated a golden light that resonated perfectly with Margaret's, indicating deep affinities that transcended her recently concluded earthly life. Others emanated complementary frequencies, like musical notes harmonizing to create celestial chords. Gradually, it became clear that Margaret was being introduced to the souls who would form her new spiritual family in the higher planes. The process was neither random nor based on superficial preferences. Cayce perceived that a higher cosmic intelligence was orchestrating these encounters, a divine wisdom that recognized the evolutionary needs of each soul and connected them with the most suitable spiritual companions for the next phase of their journey. Margaret was gently guided to a specific group of souls whose collective mission was to work with the emotional healing of children who had suffered deep trauma. Her earthly experience as an elementary school teacher, combined with the lessons of compassion she had learned through her own difficulties, perfectly qualified her for this spiritual service. As Margaret integrated into her new spiritual group, Cayce observed how the dynamics between these souls were fundamentally different from earthly relationships. There was no ego, competition, or misunderstandings. Each soul contributed its unique gifts to the collective purpose, creating a synergy that exponentially amplified individual capabilities. It was like watching a cosmic orchestra, where each instrument, however simple, added an essential note to the divine symphony. For weeks, these visions continued to unfold in Cayce's expanded consciousness, revealing to him increasingly deeper aspects of the spiritual organization of the beyond. He saw how souls are grouped not only by affinities and purposes, but also by levels of spiritual development. More evolved souls serve as mentors and guides for those beginning their journey in the spiritual world, creating a hierarchy based on love and service, never on domination or control. One of the most surprising revelations came when Cayce witnessed the process by which souls who had maintained difficult relationships on earth found opportunities for healing and reconciliation in the spiritual planes. He saw a man who had had a troubled relationship with his earthly father being gently guided to an encounter with the paternal soul in the afterlife. Far from the limitations of human personality and earthly emotional wounds, both souls were able to perceive the dynamics of their relationship from a completely new perspective. The father showed the son how his apparent harshness and distance in earthly life had been clumsy attempts to prepare the young man for life's difficulties based on his own unhealed childhood wounds. The son, in turn, could understand how his rebellion and resentment had been natural reactions to complex family dynamics that transcended individual responsibility. Through this mutual understanding, both souls experienced a deep healing that freed them from karmic patterns that had perpetuated through multiple incarnations. Cayce observed how this process of healing and reconciliation was not limited to family relationships, but extended to all the significant connections the soul had developed during its passages through Earth. Old friendships were renewed at deeper levels. Loving relationships were purified of all egocentric projections and expectations, and even relationships that had ended in conflict found opportunities for transformation and mutual growth. During a particularly intense experience in November, Cayce witnessed something that deeply touched him: the reunion of a young mother who had departed prematurely with the children she had left on Earth. The soul of this mother, whom he perceived to be named Susan, had intensely worried about the well-being of her young children after her passing. In the spiritual world, she discovered that her connection with them had not been interrupted by physical death, but had transformed into something even deeper and more significant. Susan was introduced to a group of souls whose mission was to protect and guide orphaned children or those who had lost their parents prematurely. Through this spiritual work, she could continue to care not only for her own children, but for countless other children in need of maternal love. Cayce saw how Susan developed the ability to send impulses of love and protection directly to the hearts of her earthly children, manifesting through comforting dreams, meaningful coincidences, and an inexplicable feeling of loving presence in moments of greatest need. Even more extraordinary was when Cayce witnessed how Susan's children, even being too young to rationally understand what was happening, intuitively responded to their mother's spiritual presence. They began to demonstrate an emotional maturity unusual for their ages, an ability to comfort other children in distress, and a natural connection to spiritual dimensions that manifested through imaginary play, which was, in fact, real interactions with beings of light. These revelations led Cayce to understand that death does not represent a definitive separation between souls who love each other, but rather a transformation in the nature of that connection. True bonds of love transcend all dimensional barriers, continuing to nurture and bless those who remain on Earth. Departed souls develop increasingly refined forms of communication and support, manifesting their love through subtle signs easily recognized by open and sensitive hearts. In December, when Cayce's strength was visibly waning, he had the deepest of all his final experiences. During a particularly peaceful night, his consciousness was lifted to even higher dimensions of the spiritual world, where he witnessed what he recognized as the process by which souls choose their next earthly experiences. It was a revelation that completely changed his understanding of the purpose of existence and the nature of spiritual evolution. Cayce saw how souls, after periods of rest, healing, and service in the spiritual planes, naturally reach a point where they feel the need to return to the physical dimensions to continue their evolutionary growth. This process is not imposed by external forces, but arises as a natural impulse of the soul itself, similar to a child's desire to explore new territories as they grow and develop. The choice of the next incarnation is made in collaboration with groups of more evolved souls who serve as spiritual advisors, helping each soul identify the specific experiences that will most contribute to its development. Cayce observed how this process involves the careful analysis of karmic patterns that need to be balanced, lessons that still need to be learned, and services the soul is prepared to offer humanity. Even more fascinating was witnessing how souls choose not only their own experiences, but also collaborate in the choice of earthly families that will best serve the evolutionary purposes of everyone involved. Cayce saw entire groups of souls planning coordinated incarnations, where each member of the group would assume specific roles in the lives of others, as parents, children, spouses, friends, or even adversaries, all orchestrated to create the perfect opportunities for growth and mutual learning. This revelation illuminated for Cayce why certain people feel instantly connected when they first meet, why some relationships seem to transcend the normal circumstances of life, and why certain challenging situations are exactly what the soul needs for its next evolutionary step. During his last days of physical life, Cayce experienced a state of consciousness that he recognized as a sample of what he would experience permanently after his transition. It was a state of profound peace and universal connection, where he could simultaneously perceive his unique individuality and his fundamental unity with all of existence. In this state, earthly concerns simply faded away, replaced by a clear understanding that everything was unfolding exactly as it should, according to a perfect divine plan. In his final moments, Cayce perceived how death is, in truth, a birth, an emergence of the soul from its physical shell into dimensions of unimaginable freedom and possibility. The limitations of the body, the constraints of time and space, the illusions of separation, all of this simply dissolved as consciousness expanded to encompass its true infinite nature. He saw how each soul making this transition is greeted with unconditional love, no matter what their failings or limitations may have been during earthly life. The spiritual universe operates on the basis of absolute compassion, recognizing that each soul is doing the best it can within its circumstances and level of development. There is no punishment or condemnation, only infinite opportunities for growth, healing, and service. The last vision Cayce had before his passing was of himself encountering his new spiritual family, a group of souls dedicated to the work of bridging the physical and spiritual worlds. These souls had worked across different eras and cultures to bring spiritual revelations to humanity, each adapting their message to the needs and understanding of their specific time. Cayce realized he was part of an ancient lineage of souls whose mission was to keep the flame of spiritual truth burning during humanity's darkest periods. Through prophets, mystics, healers, and visionaries, this lineage had worked tirelessly to remind humanity of its true divine nature and its evolutionary purpose. At the moment of his final transition, Edgar Cayce experienced something that completely transformed his understanding of the nature of existence. He realized that life and death are not opposites, but complementary aspects of an eternal cycle of growth and transformation. The soul never truly dies. It simply shifts from one state of consciousness to another, from one dimension of experience to another, always toward greater expansion, greater love, and greater service. His final earthly perception was the understanding that each human soul is a unique facet of the infinite diamond of divine consciousness. Though each facet is individual and irreplaceable, they all reflect the same eternal light and are an inseparable part of the same cosmic jewel. The journey of each soul through the different dimensions of existence is part of a grand process by which divine consciousness itself knows and expresses itself through infinite forms and experiences. When Edgar Cayce finally left his physical body in January 1945, he didn't die in the traditional sense of the word. He simply expanded his consciousness to encompass greater dimensions of his eternal being, continuing his work of healing and spiritual revelation in ways that completely transcend the limitations of physical existence. His transition was, in fact, a graduation, the movement of a great servant of humanity from one level of service to an even greater one. The revelations Cayce received in his final months of earthly life remain a treasure trove of wisdom about the true nature of death, the afterlife, and the eternal purpose of the human soul. They remind us that we are not physical beings having temporary spiritual experiences, but eternal spiritual beings having temporary physical experiences. Each earthly life is a precious opportunity for growth, healing, and service, but it is only one chapter in the infinite story of the soul. Death, far from being an end, is a transformation, a liberation, a reunion with our true cosmic family. It is the moment when the soul sheds the heavy garments of earthly personality and clothes itself in the luminous robes of its divine nature. It is when we discover that we were never truly separated from those we love, that love transcends all dimensional barriers, and that our journey through eternity is a sacred dance of souls who meet, support each other, and grow together toward final union with the source of all existence. Edgar Cayce's final words, whispered only to Gertrude moments before his transition, summarize all the wisdom he had accumulated through a lifetime of spiritual service. The soul never dies, my dear. It simply dances from one dimension to another, always toward the cosmic home where we will all meet again, where all tears will be wiped away and where love will finally reveal its true and eternal face.